Alright, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And occasionally, when I do one of these video presentations and I go to save, the machine locks up and or there's nothing there to save. Such was the case yesterday when in the classroom I lectured on Chapter 5. So I'm going to re-lecture. I'm in the classroom by myself. It's about 5:30 in the morning. So I'm just going to do it right now. So I'm going to go back over Chapter 5 again, how to use the CSS box model for spacing, borders, and backgrounds. So as you can see here under the what's in the chapter, we are first going to talk about or get an introduction to the box model. Then we will talk about size and space elements, mainly margins and paddings, but we'll also look at height and width as well. And then we'll look at a web page that shows this sizing and spacing, including the HTML, the CSS, and a CSS with a reset selector. Then we'll go into borders and backgrounds, how to set borders, how to get rounded corners and shadows on borders, how to set background colors and images, and finally background gradients. And then we'll look at a web page, both the HTML and the CSS, that uses borders and backgrounds. Now, to start this off, what I've decided to do is to go and bring up, I had problems with VitalSource this morning. That's why you see that up. Here is the box model in all of its glory. So imagine that in here was either a paragraph, an image, whatever you want to think about. But that's the content. Surrounding the content is padding. So padding is what lies between the content and its border. So it's internal. All right, so you've got content, you've got padding, then you've got border, and then you've got margin. So margin is what is between the content and other content. So whereas the padding is internal, the margin is external. Now that's my definition. The padding and the margin are both transparent. You don't see them, but you can set them. You don't see them directly, though, other than spacing. All right? So here they say the content is the content of the box. Could be text, could be images, could be something else, I guess. Padding is the transparent area that's between the content and the border. Border, as you'll see, you can set. You can give it a type. You can give it a color. You can give it a size. Margin is the area outside of the border. And again, it's transparent. So here's an example. It's a div that's 300 pixels wide. It's got a border around it that's 15 pixels of solid green. It's got padding that's 50 pixels and margin that's 20 pixels. There it is. There's the content. There's the padding in the gray. There's the margin in the green. And what's between this paragraph here and the border, okay, so padding, content, padding, border, margin. One more time. Content, padding, border, margin. Let's change each one of these so you can see. All right. So let's come in and change the border. Instead of 15 pixels solid green, let's make it 50 pixels dashed purple. Run it. Pretty obvious what the difference is. All right, let's go set it back again. So we'll make it 20 pixels, and let's just make this solid, and I'll leave it purple. That's fine. That's okay. Now, for the padding, let's change this from 50 pixels of padding to 200 pixels of padding. So that should really change the area that's in here. And you can see that it does. All right, so I'm going to set it back again to 20. Now let's change the margin to 100 pixels. So that should increase the area between the end of this paragraph and where this border starts. That's when we get 120 pixels. And you can see that it does. Again, when you go over this, if you're confused, W3 Schools is just a terrific resource. All right? open, close a few things that I've got open here. So in the book, the author shows the box model in this way. It is the same thing, but the author is showing here again content, content width, content height, all right, padding, padding width, padding height, padding top, padding bottom, padding right, padding left, margin, margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left. So when you're calculating the height of something, you have to include both the content and any margin or padding that it has in it. So as mentioned here, the CSS box model lets you work with boxes that the browser places around each block element. Remember, a block element is something that takes up the entire width that you've set for the browser, as well as some inline elements, okay, including formatting like padding, margin, and borders. But this is a question on the test. By default, the box for a block element is as wide as the block that contains it and as tall as it needs to be based on the content. So the height of this content is how tall it takes to hold all of that text. You can use the height and width properties to specify the size of the content area. You can use other properties to control margin, padding, and border. That's what much of the rest of this chapter is about. Okay? There's also something that's called box sizing border box. All right? Again, they've got a good example here where I can show it to you. All right? So where they've got here box sizing border box, I'm going to just grab that line of text and I'm going to comment it out. Run it again. You can see what happens. All right. Uncomment it. Okay. So it allows you to go in and set and reset and include or not include, basically. What you're saying with this is, I want this to take up this much space, regardless of the margins and padding that's in it. Now, if you set margin and padding to 1,000 pixels each, you're going to be somewhat constrained as far as what you can do. All right, we're going to see this again, just so you're aware of it. All right, a web page that illustrates the box model. I've actually keyed this in. So if I just grab this text that's right here, just that text, don't put any CSS in, none whatsoever, I get, oh, where is it? I get this. No, I don't. Oh, it got reset. Doggone it. Well, that's okay. We'll just grab it. Okay, there is the text, but I'm going to go and comment this out. So I'm going to comment out all of my CSS that's in here. All right, and run this again, just to show you without anything. It's, well, that's interesting. Might be taking a cached version, so let me get rid of that and all of that. All right, now we'll try to run it again. Well, then let me try doing this. I'm just going to grab this code. All right, I'm going to open up a new browser window, add that, save this, and I'm just going to call it jeff.html. All right, so there it is. I'll wait for it to change color. Technically, I should have put all the tags in, but it should work without them. All right, so that's it. Not very grand, not very glorious. But when I come back in here and I add back in, at the top, of course, into Jeff.html, so I come back in here and I add the CSS and I uncomment the CSS. You see a wide, vast difference. There it is. So I've got a border around everything, another border here just around this, borders around each one of these. Plus it looks like I've got some padding in here, and I may have got some margin here, here, etc. So you use padding and you use margin, for lack of better words, to kind of space things out. Give it a more professional look and feel. Let me go back here again. All right. And I guess I didn't set my width right, but hopefully you get the idea. All right, setting heights and setting widths. Notice there's a width property, a height property, a min width, a max width, a min height, and a max height. Probably the one you're going to work with the most is max width. All right. You can set these with absolute values, like 450 pixels, but it's much more recommended that you set it in percentages or in rems. And usually it's done in percentages. All right. So notice here's how you set the minimum and the maximum width. So the author mentions here, if you specify a percent, okay, it says if you specify a percent for the width property, the width of the content area is based on the width of the block containing it. It's called the containing block. If you specify a percent for the height, all right, the height of the content area is based on the height of the containing block. All right. The min and max width, etc., are typically used to accommodate changes in font size. We are in Chapter 5. When we get to Chapter 8, we will be talking about responsive web design. So this will come back again. All right. Setting margins. Let me just tell you that what we're going to say about margins pretty much also applies to padding. But let's just look at both. So analog clock with 12, 3, 6, 9 only. I don't know if we've got one of those. No, doesn't look like it. But when you look here, let's grab one of these. Well, let's grab one that's easy to see. This one will work. All right. If you imagine 12, this is the top of the clock. It'll also be the top when we set margin or padding. 3 is the right. It's all the way to the right when we set margin and padding. 6 is the bottom when we set margin and padding. And 9 is the left when we set margin and padding. The order is important because if you set all 4, you should set them top, right, bottom, left. And you're going to see that in just a second. Again, virtually everything that we say for setting margins will apply to padding as well. So you can set margin top and or margin bottom and or margin right and or margin left, or you can set just one, or 1, 2, 3, or all 4, and you can set just margin. Again, you can set them in relative units of measure. You can set them in absolute units of measure. Let's look at these because, again, this will be asked on the test. If you only specify one value like this, that's as though you said margin top, 0.5 m, followed by margin right, 0.5 m, margin bottom, 0.5 m, margin left, 0.5 m. So if you only set one like this, with margin, it sets it for all 4 sides. If you set 2 of them, the first number applies to the top and bottom. The second number applies to the left and right. So this would say 0 margin, top and bottom, 1 m margin, left and right. if you set 3 numbers, the first number is for the top, so 0.5M. The second number is for the left and the right, so that's 1M. The last number is for the bottom, 2M. And if you set all 4, again, the order will be just like a clock: top, right, bottom, left. That's exactly what the author talks about. If you specify a bottom margin for one element and a top for the other, the margins are collapsed. So the system will look at it. So if I've got 2 elements, an element here with a bottom margin of 30 pixels and an element here with a top margin of 20 pixels, the one with 20 will be, basically the system won't look at it. It'll just use the bigger one, which is 30, and collapse. You typically use the auto keyword with margin if you want to center something on a page. Padding, again, is set up the same way. Top right, bottom left. Same rules apply that we just saw. If you set something to 0 like this, notice you do not repeat. You do not have to say 0 pixels or 0M or whatever. Just 0 will work just fine. Here's another web page that shows sizing and spacing. Hopefully what you're realizing is this is starting to get a more professional look and feel to it. It's centered, somewhat centered on the page, the content. Maybe not, maybe not the footer down here. So we've got a lot of margin here and here, a little margin here, a little margin here, some padding between elements, etc. So it says the page is centered in the browser window, and it uses margins and paddings to improve the spacing before and after headings, between list items, between paragraphs. So let's look at, there's the CSS. And I guess that's all they show. So let's look at it. The body has a width of 700 pixels. That's an absolute value. We did not use percentages. It's always expected to be 700 pixels. Today, with the large amount of tablets, phones, etc. that people use, this should be a max width property typically, and it should be a percentage. This says I want 1M of margin, top and bottom, and center the left and right, so center it on the page. This is the equivalent of a reset for these 4 elements. This says for all H1, H2, H3, and paragraph elements, get rid of any margin, get rid of any padding. This says for my unordered list, I want a margin, no margin on the top, no margin on the right or left, and on the bottom a 1.5M margin. This is for the LIs. So after each list element, we want some padding just on the bottom to space them out a little bit. Again, the idea is you want them to look more professional. So a little space between. There's ways that you can do this. Not everything has to be done this way, just so you know. Our paragraphs have a padding on the top and bottom of 0.25M, no left or right padding. Finally, our H1 header, our H2 header has a bottom margin of 0.25M. Our H1 header inside of main has a margin of 1M on the top, no margin left or right, 0.35 on the bottom. This contact us, which is an ID, has a top margin of 1M, and our footer has what? It has a margin top only of 1M. Notice the paragraph in the footer, 80% and aligned right. All right. So this reset selector, we have talked about this before, but there is an example right there. Now, to take that to the extreme, I've shown this before, I'm going to show it again. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to type in Eric Meyer, CSS Reset. And where is it? There it is. Notice what Mr. Meyer does. Sets margin padding border to 0. And that's for virtually just about every element there is. All right. Just to show you that, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to come back, and in here where I had all this stuff in the style, I'm going to go in and I'm going to comment it out. I know we've done this before, I get it. But then right below it, I'm going to paste in Mr. Meyer's style stuff. All right. Now I think I put it outside. Yeah, I've got it outside. No, maybe not. Let me get rid of a bunch of this stuff that's in here. Why is that looking funky as it is? There. Is that going to look better? No, it doesn't. So there's my style. Try to pretty this up so you can take a look at it. I'm not sure why that stuff is not being color coded. Let's try and save it and see what happens. Let's just get rid of all this. Okay, we'll keep this. All right, and I'm just going to grab the ones that you'd use most often, okay? Put them right there. Still don't know why that's not showing, but it's not. Style. H1, H2. Let's do these. Let's just grab. Again, I just want to grab the stuff you would typically use in here. All right. All right. So that is saying what? That what we want in here, let me get back, grab this, put it here. Style, style. Oh, why that's not working? But let's come in here and do this. How about just that universal selector again? And we'll say margin 0, padding 0. Again, I'm not sure why my color codedness in here is screwed up, for lack of better words, but it is. Let's see if that does anything. You see how it got rid of all the margin and all the padding? It just pushed everything up to the side. That's what a reset does. Sorry that was a little long-winded. Hopefully it made some sense to you. Borders and backgrounds. Again, I believe that W3 Schools is the ideal site to learn this stuff. So, W3 Schools, border. So, borders. Notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different borders, including none. Dotted, dashed, solid is the one that's used probably about 90% of the time. Okay, so what they do is they give you a paragraph, 10 paragraphs with every one of them in here. Dotted, dashed, solid, double, which is kind of hard to see, groove, ridge, inset, and outset. When you set a border, you can set an entire border, You can set just a border top, a border bottom, a border left, or a border right. All right, so there's a lot of ways that this can be set. Again, you can set them with absolute values. You can set them with relative values. Notice that the way that this is set up, 1 pixel, remember our clock example, top, right, bottom, left, 2 of them. So 1 pixel, top, bottom, 2 pixels, right, left. 3 of them, 1 pixel, top, 2 pixels, left, right, 2 pixels, bottom. I don't know why you do that one, but, and all 4. When you set a border, you can set a width. You can set a style. You can set a color. So let's look at this. Okay? And when I copy like this, if you don't know this already, it comes out looking really, really bad. Because it gives me a lot more than I wanted. All right. So, if I say this, let's assume, for example, that around a paragraph. All right, so I've got a paragraph. And I say I want a border bottom. All right, so I want all this stuff. Okay, and let's assume, I'm going to just try to keep this real simple here. I'm not going to do bottom, left, and right, but I'm going to do border width like this. I'm going to do border style like this, and I'm going to do border color like this. What I'm telling you is I can just come in here and say, instead of putting them in like this, which is okay, I can just say border 4 pixels dashed gray. And the order in which I put these 3 elements does not matter. All right, so I put them in any order I want. You more often than not are going to see it like this, where you combine all 3 elements into one, then you probably will like this. Oops, I don't want that. Sorry, I'm getting the onset of a cold. All right. How to use CSS3 to round corners. Getting up there in time here. And shadows to borders. Okay. So let's take a look at some examples. There is a problem on your next test that's very similar to this. So let's look at that. All right. Notice if you say border radius, sound familiar? It applies to all 4 corners. All right. But now look, top left, top right, top left and top right, then lower right and lower left, top left, top right, lower left. So it kind of goes in a square, for lack of better words. So what do we have here? We've got a border that's 5 pixels double blue. That's this one right here. By default, this is going to look squared. So if we didn't have the radius in here, this would look like a square. All right. But we put a radius in. So again, 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 0 pixels, 20 pixels. That's the radius. The bigger the number, the more rounded it's going to look. So this looks more rounded than this does. All right. And these two are the same. Here there's no rounding. Now shadow, notice horizontal offset, vertical offset, blur radius, and spread color. So what have we done in here? We've got a shadow, and usually from what I see, these 2 numbers are the same, these 2 numbers are the same, and then you give it a color. So this is a red shadow that we're putting around it. All right, so notice 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 4 pixels, 4 pixels. Setting a background color in images. Quite often you'll set both a color and an image, both of them. Why would you do this? This says, I want the background to be blue, but I also want it to hold that image. If for some reason that's a small image, because we don't have any repeat here, that means put it in as many times as there's room. But if there's anything that's not covered by an image, make sure that the background is blue. So this is just a background color. This is a combination of a background color and image. This is the same thing, basically. But we're telling it repeat why. Now, most of us are used to back in the days of, let's see. Let's look at, see if I can find another picture here. All right, I don't know about you, but at least with me, I'm used to something like this, right here. All right, and it's a little bigger, but that's a little ugly too. How about, we'll use that one, even though it's ugly. So, y-axis, x-axis, point of origin is 0, 0. Not on a web page. On a web page, the point of origin is in the upper left-hand corner, so it would be the equivalent of right here. That would be 0, 0. All right, just kind of keep that in mind as we're starting to go through the rest of the examples that are in here. So you can repeat something on the x-axis as many times as you want. Repeat it on the y-axis as many times as you want. Repeat, which repeats both x and y, or no repeat. And it's important, especially with small images, that you set the repeat if you only want it in there once. You can set the positioning, all right, of your image. And you can have a background scroll or be fixed, meaning if it scrolls, it moves as you scroll, and if it's fixed, it stays there. Notice, don't use a background color or image that makes the text that it's over difficult to read. Remember again, approximately 10% of the population is colorblind. And if you do that, it'll be hard for them to read. All right, gradients. When we look at the example here, here's some gradients. Notice, I kind of look at it as sort of being like morphing. Here we're kind of morphing from white to red. Here we've got, it's no morph, but we've got a gradient that goes from red, lighter red to white, darker white to blue. All right? Quite often when you use this, you end up using what are called browser prefixes. Minus WebKit minus, that's what's used for Chrome and Safari. Minus Moz minus is for Firefox. All right. It looks like in here Internet Explorer doesn't use them anymore, but that was minus MS for Microsoft minus. And Opera is minus 0 minus. Notice here when you have these numbers, the first parameter is the direction the gradient will go. All right. To the right says for left to right, to the bottom for top to bottom, to the left for right to left, to the top for bottom, and the number of degrees it should be on. So again, my strong suggestion to you is, say, well, I'd really like to learn this. W3 Schools gradients. And you can see they show you exactly how to use them. All right. They'll be left to rights. There's diagonal, etc. You're working with angles. Virtually everything you'd want to learn is in here. All right. So we've got a web page that uses borders and backgrounds. So notice there's a border around the entire page here. The same size border, except we put a shadow here and a shadow here. In addition, we've got a background gradient around everything. So the author says the HTML is the same as what we looked at earlier. So what has changed is the CSS. and the author shows it here. Again, there's the border prefixes. If you're not sure whether or not you use the border prefixes, go into your address bar in your browser, type in caniuse.com, and put in there, for example, linear gradient. So in other words, go in there and do this. So come in here, caniuse.com, linear gradient, and you can see that it's got support basically from just about everything except the Android browser. All right. So usually when you do that, you're not going to have to put in the browser prefixes. All right. Never say never, but that's what I would say. All right. Finally, and this will take a second because I've got to remember where I put them, and unfortunately I closed a bunch of stuff. Let's see. All right, I'm just going to grab them from where I know they are, which is on the C drive. There's what we want. All right, so we are up to, for the shape up and for the Halloween exercises, we are up to Chapter 5. So we are going to enhance the home page. We're going to add spacing, borders, backgrounds to shape up. What does that mean? Well, notice we now have a border all the way around it. Okay, I'll make this smaller so you can see everything at once. So we've got a border all the way around, and it looks like the border isn't the same size. We may or may not have a shadow with it. I don't know. We're using some margin over here. We are using some padding between things. We're making it look more professional. There's not a lot you have to do here. Page 7 here, I think that, yep, that's all we got to do for this one. Format the body of the page so it's 900 pixels wide. You should know how to do that. Give it a steel blue border with a black shadow. All right, and center it in the browser window. In other words, when they say center it, you want a margin 0 auto, so this is centered. All right. Add a steel blue border below the header and above the footer. Change the color of the footer text to white. Add a gradient to the header. And adjust the margins and padding accordingly so it looks like what you see in there. So that's that one for the Halloween store. Again, not a lot we have to do here, but, I mean, it's right here. I think that's all of it. Yes, it is. So we want it to look like this when it's done. Notice there's a background here now. I think that's bats that we use. We've got a gradient here. We've got a gradient here. We've got some margin in here, possibly some padding in here. So it says we want to add spacing, borders, and backgrounds. Format the page this time. The other one was 900 pixels wide. This will be 800. A white background, a black border. All right, a background image that repeats vertically and horizontally. You don't have to say repeat -x, repeat -y. You just say repeat. That file exists in your images folder under, so this thing here with the bats on it is bats.gif. Add a black border below the header. That's this one right here. And above the footer. That's that one right there. Remove the shadow, the italics, and the color from the first heading. All right. And finally, add a gradient to the header and footer. Adjust the margins and padding accordingly. That's it. Again, apologize for this not working. the first time I like to get it done and get it out there as fast as I can. So that's it. And today, which is the 12th of September, we will be going over the next chapter, which is Chapter 6. So believe it or not, I'll actually be back with that chapter on how to use CSS for page layout. Oh, I'd say starting in about around 2 hours. See you then.